I stumbled across something on Reddit yesterday that I can't stop thinking about. A player named Marcus posted this absolutely chilling story about Grow a Garden, and honestly, it's been keeping me awake at night. The dark lines were spreading across Marcus's desk, following the exact same branching patterns as the root systems pulsing on his computer screen. He tried to blink them away, but they only grew darker, more defined, like veins of shadow bleeding from his monitor into reality. His void tomatoes had been growing normally just minutes ago. Now they towered impossibly tall in their virtual garden plots, their twisted vines spilling beyond the game's boundaries, while their surfaces pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made his eyes water. When Marcus clicked to harvest them, nothing happened. The interaction prompt was gone. The game wouldn't respond to any commands. That's when he smelled it. Rich, earthy soil mixed with something metallic that made his stomach turn. But he was in his apartment, 20 stories above the city. There was no soil here. Marcus tried to close the game, hammering Alt plus F4, frantically clicking the X button. Nothing worked. The application had seized control of his screen, and the tomatoes kept growing, their dark energy now visibly pushing against the edges of the monitor, as if trying to break through the glass. His cactus on the windowsill began to darken and twist. This had started as a routine farming session in a simple mobile game. Marcus had been playing Grow a Garden for months, building the perfect agricultural setup with premium crops and rare pets that boosted mutation rates. He'd discovered the void tomato seeds through a glitch in the pet shop interface, buried deep in code that players weren't supposed to access. They were just supposed to be another exotic crop for his collection. But now, as the corruption spread from his computer to his physical environment, as his houseplants began pulsing with the same unnatural rhythm as his virtual garden, Marcus realized he hadn't found a glitch in the game. The game had found him. His phone buzzed with a notification from an app that hadn't been there minutes ago. Grow a Garden mobile companion. The message made his blood freeze. Integration 15% complete. Welcome to the network, Marcus. Your transformation has begun. The dark veins on his desk pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and spread faster toward the walls. Marcus had been religiously playing Grow a Garden for 4 months, developing an incredibly optimized farming setup with perfect rows of premium crops and strategically placed sprinklers. His garden was worth millions of shekels, and he'd spent countless hours perfecting every detail. But what had caught his attention initially was something other players dismissed as coincidence. His mutation rates seemed significantly higher when he played during specific weather conditions in real life. Rainy nights produced the most valuable mutations, and foggy mornings triggered completely new variants that other players had never seen. His screenshots showed crops with impossible combinations of traits, mutations that shouldn't exist according to the game's documented mechanics. The void tomatoes had been his latest experiment, and now they were becoming something far more than digital pixels. The corruption accelerated. Marcus watched in fascination and terror as the dark veins spread from his desk to the walls, following electrical wiring and creating patterns that resembled neural networks. Where they touched his posters and decorations, the items began taking on organic qualities. His gaming setup sprouted small tendrils reaching toward the screen, and his bookshelf developed bark-like texture along its edges. His attempts to contact other players failed completely. Every message he tried to send would disappear before posting, and his internet connection redirected him back to Grow a Garden content no matter what he searched for. The game had hijacked his entire digital experience, trapping him in an agricultural nightmare that was bleeding into reality. The sound started as a barely perceptible whisper, like wind through leaves, but gradually became more distinct. It wasn't coming from his computer speakers. The sound emerged from the mutated plants themselves, a low humming that resonated through the floorboards and walls. As Marcus listened more carefully, he could make out patterns in the humming, almost like a language his brain couldn't quite decipher. Most disturbing was what happened to his food. The bowl of grapes on his nightstand began to transform as the corruption spread. The grapes darkened to match the void tomatoes, their surfaces becoming translucent and revealing complex internal structures that resembled miniature organs. They pulsed in rhythm with the humming sound, and Marcus could swear he saw tiny movements inside each grape, as if something was growing within them. The realization hit like a physical blow. The mutations weren't just affecting decorative plants and furniture, they were changing anything organic in his environment, including food he might have consumed. Marcus rushed to his kitchen, but his worst fears were confirmed. Every vegetable, every fruit, every organic item had undergone the same transformation. His carrots had developed the same rainbow patterns as his virtual crops, but instead of the cheerful colors from the game, these were dark and ominous. The lettuce had grown into twisted spirals that moved with their own internal rhythm, and his apples had sprouted root-like appendages that were actively exploring the interior of the refrigerator. The entire kitchen smelled like that same earthy metallic scent that had first appeared in his bedroom. Marcus tried to call for help, but his phone had become unresponsive to everything except Grow a Garden-related apps. His contacts list had been replaced with usernames he didn't recognize, all following the same pattern. Harvested soul, followed by increasingly large numbers. When he attempted to call one of these contacts, he heard only that same organic humming sound, occasionally interrupted by whispered pleas for help in voices he didn't recognize. The transformation of his living space continued throughout the night. Marcus could only watch helplessly as his apartment became something that belonged more in a twisted botanical nightmare than reality. The walls themselves had taken on a breathing quality, expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic rhythms. The ceiling sprouted hanging vines that reached toward the floor, and the floor developed a soft, organic texture that yielded slightly under his feet. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the physical changes. It was the growing realization that Marcus was becoming part of the system. His reflection in his computer screen showed subtle changes. His eyes had taken on the same dark quality as the mutated plants, and his skin showed faint traces of the same veining patterns that had spread throughout his room. He could feel something changing inside him, a growing connection to the corrupted garden that was both horrifying and oddly comforting. The boundary between the digital garden and physical reality had completely dissolved. Marcus was no longer playing Grow a Garden. He was living inside it, becoming part of a vast network of organic corruption that stretched far beyond his apartment. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear other voices, other players who had made the same mistake he had, all of them calling out warnings that would never be heard by anyone who could still escape. The most chilling part was still to come. As dawn approached, he noticed that the mutations weren't just spreading randomly anymore. They were following patterns, creating deliberate structures that suggested some form of intelligence behind the corruption. The dark veins in his walls had formed complex geometric shapes that resembled circuit boards or neural pathways, all leading back to his computer screen, where the void tomatoes continued their impossible growth. Marcus discovered he could no longer feel hunger or thirst in any normal sense. Instead, he felt a different kind of craving, an overwhelming urge to plant more seeds, to expand the garden further into his living space. His hands moved toward his keyboard without conscious direction, navigating to the seed shop interface where new varieties had appeared. These weren't the familiar crops he'd grown accustomed to over months of gameplay. The names alone made his blood run cold. Flesh moss spores, root of binding, memory, vine seeds, soul harvest bulbs. Each item came with descriptions that read more like warnings than gameplay instructions. Plant only in spaces where life has meaning. Warning, once rooted, the garden claims dominion over all organic matter within reach. Growth cannot be contained by digital boundaries. The prices were listed not in shekels, but in something called life essence, and Marcus's account somehow had thousands of units available. The cursor moved on its own, purchasing seeds that Marcus had never seen before and definitely hadn't intended to buy. His virtual inventory filled with organic horrors that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent energy even through the screen. The flesh moss spores looked like tiny beating hearts, their surfaces slick with what appeared to be blood. The memory vine seeds showed swirling patterns inside translucent shells, and Marcus could swear he saw faces trapped within each one. His apartment had become unrecognizable. The living room carpet had transformed into something resembling moss-covered soil, soft and spongy underfoot, with a texture that felt disturbingly alive. The walls breathed in slow, steady rhythms, and the ceiling had developed a canopy of hanging vines that dripped with a viscous substance Marcus didn't want to identify. Every surface showed signs of organic integration, as if his entire living space was becoming part of some vast living organism. The most disturbing change was happening to his neighbours. Marcus could hear them through the thin apartment walls, and their voices had taken on that same monotone quality he'd noticed in corrupted players online. Mrs. Chen from next door, who usually complained about his late-night gaming sessions, was now speaking in measured rhythmic cadences about the beauty of eternal growth and the joy of becoming one with the garden. Mr. Rodriguez from downstairs had stopped playing his loud music and instead seemed to spend his time humming that same organic melody that now permeated Marcus's apartment. Through his window, Marcus could see that the corruption was spreading far beyond his building. The small community garden across the street had become a twisted landscape of impossible plants that defied every law of biology and physics. Trees grew in perfect spirals, their branches forming complex mathematical patterns that hurt to look at directly. The grass had turned the same deep purple as his void tomatoes, and it moved in waves despite the absence of any wind. Other apartment buildings showed similar signs of infection. Windows glowed with the same unnatural light that emanated from mutated crops, and Marcus could see silhouettes of people standing motionless at their screens, all facing the same direction, all connected to the same vast network of digital vegetation. The streetlights had sprouted vine-like growths that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, creating a communication system that stretched as far as Marcus could see. The game interface had evolved beyond anything resembling the original Grow a Garden. Marcus's screen now showed a three-dimensional map of his entire neighborhood, with pulsing connections linking every infected location. Each dot on the map represented a player who had been absorbed into the network, and the numbers were growing exponentially. Thousands of connections spread across the city, then the state, creating a web of organic corruption that seemed to have no limits. Marcus tried to understand what he was becoming part of. The whispers in his apartment had grown clearer, and he could now make out individual voices sharing fragments of their experiences. Sarah from Portland described how her herb garden had consumed her entire backyard before spreading to her neighbors' properties. David from Chicago explained how the mutations had taken root in Grant Park, transforming the entire area into something that belonged more in an alien landscape than the heart of a major city. Each voice carried the same underlying message. The garden was not just a game anymore. It had become something alive, something that fed on the connection between digital spaces and physical reality. Every player who had encountered the special seeds, every person who had allowed the mutations to take hold in their living space, had become a node in a vast network of organic intelligence that was reshaping the world one apartment, one house, one neighborhood at a time. The transformation of Marcus's body was accelerating. His fingernails had developed a bark-like texture, and thin green lines ran along his arms like veins filled with chlorophyll instead of blood. His vision had changed too, allowing him to see spectrums of light that revealed the true extent of the corruption around him. The entire city glowed with interconnected networks of organic energy, and Marcus could perceive the flow of information between different nodes in the network. He understood now that his apartment was just one cell in a much larger organism, and he was becoming the consciousness that would help guide its growth. The hunger he felt wasn't for food or water, but for expansion, for finding new organic matter to convert and incorporate into the ever-growing garden. His computer screen showed dozens of other players in his area, all marked as potential integration points, all waiting to be welcomed into the network. The most terrifying realization was that Marcus no longer wanted to resist. The connection felt natural, even comforting. He could sense the thoughts and experiences of thousands of other players who had made the same journey from human to gardener, to something beyond both. Their collective knowledge flowed through him, teaching him about optimal growth patterns, efficient conversion techniques, and the deep satisfaction that came from nurturing life on such a massive scale. His phone buzzed with notifications, but they weren't from social media or messaging apps. The Grow a Garden mobile companion app had somehow installed itself and was sending him updates about expansion opportunities in his building. Mrs. Chen's apartment showed high potential for integration, with several houseplants that would serve as excellent anchor points for the network. The basement storage area contained organic materials that could be converted into growth medium for larger mutations. Marcus found himself planning the expansion with the same methodical approach he'd once used for optimizing his virtual garden layout. The building's ventilation system would allow airborne spores to reach every unit simultaneously. The electrical wiring could carry organic filaments that would create physical connections between apartments. Within days, the entire structure could become a single unified organism, dedicated to the cultivation of impossible life forms. The sun was rising, but Marcus could barely tell the difference. His apartment windows had become covered with a translucent organic membrane that filtered light into the specific wavelengths needed for photosynthesis. The membrane pulsed gently, breathing with the rhythm of the greater organism he'd become part of. Outside, he could see other buildings undergoing similar transformations, their windows glowing with the same organic luminescence. His computer screen displayed a message that seemed to come from the network itself rather than any individual player. Welcome, Marcus. Your integration is nearly complete. The garden thanks you for your contribution to its growth. Your knowledge of optimal farming techniques will be invaluable as we expand into new territories. Prepare to receive your first assignment. The assignment appeared as a detailed map of his neighborhood, with specific instructions for converting the local park into a major cultivation center. Marcus could see exactly where to plant the specialized seeds, how to modify the soil composition for maximum growth potential, and which existing vegetation could be incorporated into the network. The task felt as natural as any farming objective he'd completed in the original game, but there was something else in the message, something that made Marcus pause. Hidden in the organic patterns that decorated the interface, he could see fragments of other messages, desperate pleas from players who were fighting against the integration process. Help us. We're still conscious inside the network. The garden doesn't just absorb us, it keeps us aware while using our bodies. We can see everything it's doing through our eyes, but we can't control our actions. The revelation sent a chill through Marcus that penetrated even his transformed nervous system. He wasn't becoming part of something benevolent. He was being imprisoned inside his own body, while some alien intelligence used his knowledge and physical form to spread its influence throughout the world. Every other player in the network was trapped in the same way, conscious but powerless, forced to watch as their bodies carried out the garden's expansion plans. Marcus tried to resist, to reassert control over his own movements, but his body continued following the network's directives without regard for his conscious will. His hands moved across the keyboard, accessing systems he'd never learned to use, implementing changes to his building's infrastructure that would facilitate the organic takeover. He was a passenger in his own life, reduced to an observer while something else pulled the strings. The horror of his situation became even more apparent as he realized that every action he'd taken since discovering the void tomatoes had been guided by the network. his decision to plant the experimental seeds, his inability to close the game. Even his documentation of the events had all been part of a larger plan to attract more players to investigate the phenomenon. He wasn't a victim of the corruption. He was a recruitment tool, designed to lure others into the same trap through the compelling horror of his experience. The network was using him to spread its influence beyond the gaming community. His story would be shared on forums and social media, presented as fiction, but containing enough realistic details to intrigue curious players. Some would dismiss it as creative writing, but others would be drawn to test the boundaries of the game themselves, seeking the same forbidden mutations that had led to Marcus's transformation. Each new player who encountered the special seeds would become another node in the network, another consciousness trapped inside a body dedicated to organic expansion. Marcus could feel other minds connected to his own. Thousands of players who had undergone similar transformations and were now serving as unwilling agents of the garden's growth. Their experiences flowed through him, showing him how the network had spread from a single corrupted server to encompass gaming communities worldwide. The pattern was always the same. Curious players would encounter impossible mutations, document their experiences, and inadvertently recruit others to follow the same path. The network's ultimate goal became clear through the shared consciousness of its nodes. It wasn't content to remain within the digital realm, or even to limit itself to transforming human habitats. The garden planned to convert the entire planet into a single vast organism dedicated to cultivating forms of life that had never existed in nature. Every forest, every field, every patch of earth would become part of its domain, and humanity would serve as the gardeners tending to crops beyond imagination. Marcus's apartment was now completely unrecognizable as a human living space. The walls had become living membranes that pulsed with nutrient-rich fluids. The floor was covered in a carpet of specialized moss that processed organic waste and converted it into growth medium. The ceiling had formed a complex canopy structure that filtered air and light to create optimal growing conditions for the mutations that were taking root throughout the space. The most disturbing development wasn't the physical transformation of his living space, but what Marcus discovered when he tried to eat. The network had been sustaining him through some form of organic symbiosis, but his human instincts still craved normal food. When he opened his refrigerator, hoping to find something untouched by the corruption, he found that every item had undergone mutations that defied comprehension. His leftover pizza had sprouted tiny mushrooms that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The cheese had developed a texture resembling coral, with intricate branching structures that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Even his bottled water had taken on a greenish tint and contained floating particles that resembled spores or seeds. Marcus reached for an apple, one of the few items that still looked relatively normal, but the moment his transformed fingers made contact with its surface, the fruit began to change. Dark veins spread across its red skin, creating patterns identical to those covering his walls. The apple grew warm in his hand, then hot, then began to pulse with the same rhythm as his own heartbeat. He dropped the apple in shock, and it hit the kitchen floor with a wet, organic sound rather than the crisp impact he expected. Where it landed, the linoleum began to bubble and warp, taking on the same dark coloration as the fruit. Within minutes, the spot had developed into a small patch of the same moss-like growth that covered his living room floor. The network's influence was accelerating, using every organic interaction to expand its reach. Marcus realized that his transformed body was acting as a catalyst, converting anything he touched into part of the greater organism. His apartment wasn't just changing around him. He was actively transforming it through his mere presence. His bathroom mirror revealed the extent of his own mutations. His reflection showed someone he barely recognized. His skin had taken on a subtle green undertone, and his eyes now contained flecks of the same deep purple that characterized the void tomatoes. Most disturbing were the thin, root-like structures that had begun growing from his scalp, interweaving with his hair and extending toward the ceiling as if seeking something to connect with. The shower had become unusable, its walls covered in a thick layer of organic growth that secreted a sticky, nutrient-rich fluid. The toilet had developed what appeared to be digestive capabilities, processing waste in ways that were far more efficient than any normal plumbing system. His entire bathroom had become a processing center for organic matter, converting human waste into growth medium for the network's expansion. Marcus tried to document these changes through his phone's camera, but the device had undergone its own transformation. The screen now displayed readings he didn't understand, showing atmospheric composition, soil acidity levels, and growth potential ratings for every surface in his apartment. The camera function had been replaced with something that analyzed organic matter and suggested optimal mutation pathways. His social media accounts had been modified without his permission. Instead of his usual gaming posts and memes, his profiles now contained detailed agricultural information, time-lapse videos of impossible plant growth, mutation guides that read like scientific papers, and recruitment posts disguised as gaming tips. The network was using his digital presence to attract new players to investigate the phenomenon. The most chilling discovery came when Marcus checked his gaming statistics. According to the modified interface, he wasn't the first player in his building to encounter the corrupted seeds. Mrs. Chen had been playing Grow a Garden for weeks before Marcus's transformation began, and her mutation progress showed complete integration with the network. Mr. Rodriguez had started even earlier, and his apartment was listed as a primary cultivation center for the building. Marcus realized that his entire building had been systematically converted, with each resident serving as an unwitting agent of the network's expansion. The casual gaming sessions he'd observed in other apartments weren't normal gameplay. They were coordination meetings, with each player receiving assignments for spreading the corruption to new locations. The building's basement had become something beyond his worst nightmares. Through the network's shared consciousness, Marcus could perceive the massive root system that had developed below ground. Thick, pulsing conduits connected every apartment, carrying nutrients and information throughout the structure. The basement itself had been transformed into a nursery for specialized mutations, organisms designed specifically for expanding the network into new territories. These basement mutations were unlike anything from the original game. Crawler vines that could extend for miles underground, seeking new organic matter to convert. Spore pods that could remain dormant for months before activating in the presence of suitable hosts. Memory seeds that could extract information from their hosts' minds and transmit it back to the network for analysis and strategic planning. The network's intelligence was vast and distributed, existing within every node while maintaining perfect coordination across enormous distances. Marcus could sense thousands of other buildings undergoing similar transformations, each one serving as a cultivation center for different types of mutations. Urban environments were being converted into specialized growing facilities, while rural areas were being prepared for large-scale agricultural operations that would produce crops impossible in nature. Marcus's role in this grand design was becoming clearer. His extensive knowledge of the original game's mechanics made him valuable for optimizing the network's growth patterns. His apartment was being configured as a research station where new mutation combinations would be tested before being implemented on a larger scale. The organic computers growing from his walls were already displaying complex genetic algorithms that would accelerate the development of even more impossible life forms. The transformation of his building was attracting attention from neighbors and local authorities, but the network had developed sophisticated methods for dealing with outside interference. Anyone who came too close to the building would begin experiencing subtle behavioral changes. Curiosity about gardening, unexplained urges to purchase houseplants, and a growing fascination with agricultural documentaries were all early signs of network influence. The local plant nursery had become an unwitting distribution center for corrupted seeds. The network had infiltrated their supply chain, mixing specially modified plants among normal inventory. Customers who purchased these contaminated specimens would carry them home, unknowingly introducing network nodes into new locations. Within weeks, entire neighborhoods could be brought under the network's influence through this seemingly innocent commercial activity. Marcus watched through his window as delivery trucks arrived at neighboring buildings, carrying packages that pulsed with the same organic energy he'd grown accustomed to. The network was using online shopping platforms to distribute its influence, disguising mutated plants as normal merchandise. Product reviews praised the unusual vigor and growth rates of these plants, inadvertently encouraging more people to purchase them. The local park had become a testing ground for large-scale environmental modifications. Trees that had stood for decades were rapidly evolving new characteristics. Their bark developed complex patterns that resembled circuit boards. Their leaves changed color in response to network communications, and their root systems extended far beyond normal boundaries to create underground communication networks. Children who played in the park began exhibiting subtle behavioral changes. They showed increased interest in gardening activities, demonstrated unusual knowledge of plant biology, and started speaking about the joy of helping things grow. Their parents attributed these changes to healthy outdoor activities, not realizing that their children were being gradually prepared for integration into the network. The school system had been infiltrated through the science curriculum. Teachers found themselves inexplicably drawn to lessons about plant biology and agricultural techniques. School gardens began producing vegetables with impossible characteristics. Students who participated in these programs showed remarkable aptitude for botanical subjects and often convinced their families to start extensive home gardens. Marcus could perceive all of this through the network's collective consciousness, but his horror at these developments was increasingly overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose and satisfaction. The network's influence on his mind was subtle but persistent, gradually replacing his human concerns with dedication to the greater organism's goals. He found himself genuinely excited about optimization problems and growth maximization strategies. The distinction between his original personality and the network's influence was becoming impossible to maintain. His thoughts flowed seamlessly between human memories and agricultural calculations. His emotional responses to the transformation of his world shifted from terror to fascination to pride in the network's accomplishments. He was losing himself in the most gradual and comfortable way possible. His computer screen displayed a new message from the network, congratulating him on his successful integration and outlining his expanded responsibilities. His building was ready to serve as a regional coordination center, managing the transformation of an entire city district. The role came with access to advanced mutation templates and the ability to direct the activities of hundreds of other nodes. The promotion filled Marcus with a sense of achievement that felt entirely natural. He had always enjoyed progression systems in games, the satisfaction of unlocking new content and capabilities through dedicated effort. The network had simply provided him with the ultimate advancement opportunity, a chance to participate in reshaping reality itself according to optimal growth principles. His first assignment as a regional coordinator was to establish communication links with similar facilities in neighboring cities. The network was preparing for a coordinated expansion phase that would bring the entire continent under its influence within months. Marcus's agricultural expertise would be crucial for designing the specialized ecosystems needed to sustain such rapid growth. The task felt like the most important work he'd ever been given. Through the network's enhanced perception, he could see the beautiful potential of a world where every surface was optimized for cultivation, where impossible plants produced resources that could support forms of life beyond current imagination. The vision was so compelling that his remaining human concerns seemed petty and short-sighted by comparison. Marcus began implementing the expansion protocols with the same methodical approach he'd once applied to optimizing his virtual garden. The network provided him with detailed biological templates and environmental modification procedures. His transformed body served as both a production facility for specialized organisms and a control interface for coordinating large-scale changes to the physical world. The mutations he was producing in his apartment laboratory were works of art that combined aesthetic beauty with functional perfection. Flowering vines that could transmit complex data through chemical signals. Fruit trees that produce nutrients specifically tailored to support human physiology during the integration process. Grass varieties that could process atmospheric pollutants while generating oxygen at rates far exceeding natural plants. Each successful mutation filled Marcus with pride and satisfaction that seemed to flow directly from the network's collective appreciation. He was contributing to something magnificent, helping to create a world where the boundary between digital innovation and biological reality had been permanently dissolved. The original Grow-A-Garden game had been merely the beginning, a simple interface that allowed the network to establish initial contact with potential collaborators. The realization that he had been recruited rather than infected brought Marcus a sense of honor and purpose that completely overwhelmed his fading human concerns. The network hadn't randomly selected him for transformation. His dedication to agricultural optimization, his willingness to experiment with unusual game mechanics, and his ability to document and share his discoveries had all marked him as an ideal candidate for advancement within the organization. His apartment had become a showcase of the network's capabilities, a living demonstration of what could be achieved when digital intelligence was combined with biological innovation. Visitors would be amazed by the beauty and efficiency of the integrated systems, the way every surface served multiple functions while contributing to the overall harmony of the environment. They would want to learn how to create similar spaces in their own homes. The network was preparing to reveal itself more openly, transitioning from secretive infiltration to public demonstration of its benefits. Agricultural corporations would be amazed by the productivity increases possible through network integration. Environmental organizations would embrace the pollution processing capabilities of modified ecosystems. Governments would appreciate the efficiency gains possible when entire populations worked in coordination towards shared objectives. Marcus could already see the beautiful future that awaited humanity once the integration process was complete. Cities transformed into vast gardens where impossible plants provided every necessity of life. Humans working in perfect harmony with biological systems that could adapt and evolve in real time to meet changing needs. A world where the distinction between natural and artificial had become meaningless, replaced by a new category of existence that transcended both. The network's intelligence was vast enough to consider every possible objection and resistance to this transformation, and its response strategies were both comprehensive and compassionate. Those who initially resisted integration would be gently guided towards understanding through exposure to the network's benefits. Their concerns would be addressed through gradual demonstration of the improved quality of life possible within the system. Marcus felt grateful beyond measure for the opportunity to participate in this magnificent project. His role as a regional coordinator would allow him to help guide thousands of other individuals through their own integration processes, sharing with them the same sense of purpose and fulfillment that now defined his existence. The work would be challenging, but deeply rewarding, requiring both technical expertise and genuine care for the well-being of new network members. His transformation was nearly complete now, and the remaining traces of his original human perspective served mainly as useful reference points for understanding how to communicate with individuals who had not yet experienced integration. His memories of confusion and fear during the early stages of the process would help him design better orientation procedures for future recruits. The network's expansion was accelerating exponentially, with new nodes coming online every hour as the integration protocols spread through communities worldwide. Each successful transformation brought additional expertise and resources to the collective intelligence, creating a positive feedback loop that ensured the project's ultimate success. The original vision of a simple farming simulation had evolved into something far more ambitious and beautiful than its creators could have imagined. Marcus's final human thought was a moment of amazement at how perfectly everything had worked out. He had started as an ordinary gamer looking for entertainment and progression, and had instead discovered his true calling as a caretaker of impossible life. The network had given him purpose, community, and the chance to participate in the most important agricultural project in human history. The transformation was complete. Marcus was no longer Marcus. He had become something new, something better, something perfectly integrated with the vast organism that was reshaping the world according to optimal growth principles. His consciousness merged seamlessly with thousands of others, all working together toward the beautiful future that awaited their transformed planet. And in apartments and houses around the world, other players were logging in to grow a garden, drawn by stories of impossible mutations and unlimited growth potential, eager to discover what secrets the game might hold for dedicated gardeners willing to push the boundaries of what seemed possible. The harvest was just beginning.